I've seen people score incredible watches on auction sites, and it made me wonder, could I do the same thing? I am currently in the market for a new watch, so I was thinking, why not bring you along? And maybe we can find a good deal. And come to find out, these auction sites are incredibly competitive. These auction sites sell anything from jewelry to home decor to guitars to anything that you can really think of. But of course, we're here for one thing. We're here for watches. Something I didn't expect right off the bat was these super high premiums when it comes to purchasing a watch like this. A lot of these sites have really high fees, anywhere from 8% to 25%. And that means for every $100 that you spend, you're gonna be spending $125 acquiring the watch. And that is not including taxes or shipping. So when you're bidding on these sites, you need to make sure that you take into account exactly how much the buyer premium is depending on the site, and of course, how much you're gonna be spending at the end, the grand total of the watch. Now, automatically, when I got into these sites, everything is extremely competitive. There's people pricing things super high to the point where I thought I genuinely couldn't get a deal. And I saw watches that were going for basically what they're worth. Prices were skyrocketing, I couldn't keep up with bidding, so it was really hard to get a piece until I found a listing that was somewhat unusual. The watch was extremely blurry and it didn't look like it was taken with a very good camera. But I zoomed in and I can tell there was some sort of Omega logo. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't make out whether this watch was real, fake, or even working in the first place. Once you do pay for these watches, there's no return. So whatever you bid on, you need to make sure that you do it accurately and make sure that the watch is real. So I was thinking in my mind, there's no reason or no point in bidding, but when I saw that the bid was only at $5, I had to take a chance. $5 on top of the buyer's premium and on top of shipping is basically less than $20. So I placed my bid and I waited and I ended up getting the watch. So now the real question is going to be whether this watch is real, whether it's fake, or if it even runs in the first place. And maybe even find out why nobody bid on it. So I just got the watch in, I already opened it, and I'm not going to be showing you guys the shipping label on the bottom of it. But for now, this is how it came. I believe in there should be the watch. And we're going to unravel her. A lot of plastic. A lot of plastic. Inside we have a Omega constellation. I'm gonna check if the hands work and everything right now in a minute. But for now, we have an Omega constellation. Now, this isn't one from the early days where they had the automatic movements. This is actually one that is more quartz-based, probably around the 90s. But we still don't know if it's real yet. So in order to find out if it's really real, we need to pop open the case back. And when I opened up that case back, everything was ruined. The battery inside this watch leaked all over the movement. This specifically happens when a battery is left inside a watch that is either 1, not good quality, or 2, left in there for too long. And this is the outcome of something like that happening. What I believe happened is that the battery was in there for way too long and the watch ended up being ruined. I was devastated to the point where I just thought that the watch was not repairable. I ended up doing some more research and I found out that these watches are all made with ETA movements. Omega back in the day didn't end up making their own quartz movements. What they did basically was acquire these ETA movements and smack their brand on the movement itself. The issue being, we need a new movement. The only thing that scares me about sending it out for service is how much is this going to cost? Is it worth repairing the watch, or should I just keep it like this and just sell it? Luckily, I have a watchmaker friend of mine that knows a little bit more about these watches, and I'm gonna be sending it out. I'll get it back in about 4 weeks and we'll find out together. For me, it's gonna take about 4 weeks to find out whether the watch is gonna be repairable, but for you, it's gonna be ready in 3, 2, 1. We're back and the watch looks absolutely stunning. I'm super happy with the way it turned out. My friend that repaired the watch had a very difficult time acquiring a movement that was compatible with this watch. He let me know that the watch is 100% authentic and he ended up finding an actual movement for the watch. The only thing is, how much did this cost? Well, to service this watch completely and to get it a brand new movement, the movement itself cost about $180. The service, another $40. So I'm all into this watch around $250. Finding a movement for this watch was extremely difficult. I didn't want to go down the route of buying an aftermarket movement and putting in something that was not genuinely made with Omega's intentions. So I had to wait for something to come up in the market to the point where there was either a donor or a movement that has been used in the past. And to my luck, a movement did end up coming up. I don't want to polish this watch. I do understand that the gold around the bezel could be polished, but it's something where I personally like to keep everything as natural as possible. And on top of that, I think the watch looks perfectly fine the way it is. The only way I would purposely polish the watch is if it gets to the point where, yes, the case is absolutely battered, and to the point where that gold is either super tarnished or it needs some sort of repair. I'm happy I went through this process because now I know when it comes to buying a watch like this, how much is gonna have to be invested in case something like this does happen. But the real question is, how much is this watch worth? And did I lose money? Now, when I look at these big brick and mortar companies, they sell in this watch anywhere from $1,200 all the way to $2,500. I personally don't believe it's worth that much, so I took a look on eBay, and they're typically selling around that $800 range. I do understand these brick and mortars do need to make their money, so it's totally okay for these brick and mortars to price things however they want. Make sure you know what you're buying and buy it at the right price point. For me, I got extremely lucky. I got a watch that's absolutely fantastic, and I definitely won't be afraid to go through this auction process again. I'm very grateful to go through an experience in which that I didn't have to pay a lot of money for this watch. Just for future reference, do not overpay for these watches. Have a limit. I do understand that bidding on these watches could be extremely fun, but having a limit and making sure you stick to that limit saves you in the long run in terms of how much money you're spending on these watches. Comparing this watch to my other Omega I have, it is a completely different feel and look. My Omega Automatic is more on the dressy side versus this is more on the sporty side, although you can theoretically dress them both up and down however you feel. Now the big question is whether or not I am going to keep it. Well, I was in the market for a watch and I got an absolutely killer deal. This may be on the wrist for maybe a month or two, and then at that point I probably sell it for a different watch that I actually want. And that's all part of watch collecting. Sometimes you have to buy other things in order to make room for other things, and sometimes you have to take risks in order to get the things that you want. I'm a firm believer in collecting whatever you want to collect in, and sometimes when you're collecting watches, you have to let go of other pieces in order to get other things in. So this watch in the future will probably be up for sale, but for now, is going to stay on the wrist. Now, I for one do believe I did get lucky with this purchase, but there are plenty of opportunities for you guys out there that want to buy these watches for a reasonable price. Yet, they may not be $5. I do believe that you can get yourself a wonderful timepiece that you're going to be able to cherish for a very long time. The only thing is, don't get scammed. There are people out there that are extremely scummy and will do anything to get a quick penny. Now, what that means for me and you is that we have to be a lot more cautious. But even big conglomerates like Omega themselves could get in trouble with these auction houses. In 2021, an Omega collector was selling their watch through an auction house. The Omega was a Speedmaster that looked absolutely beautiful with a beautiful brown dial. The only issue is that that watch was a Frankenstein watch. And it wasn't like people like me and you who were bidding on this watch. Omega themselves bid on this watch and they paid $3 million for a watch that was not 100% authentic. Now, when a big auction house gets watches like this, they typically do their own legitimate checks, but it turns out that these parts were actually real Omega parts. So they may have not flagged it as it being a fake Frankenstein watch. It is a so-called Frankenstein watch because it isn't one watch as a whole. It's parts of other watches that made that watch together. So that's why it's called a Frankenstein watch. Now, how it passed through an auction house, I personally have no clue, but what I do know is that there were criminal charges put against these people. But it just shows you how difficult it can be to authenticate these kind of watches in the first place. Again, this one sold for $3 million. And if this was one watch that just accidentally slipped through the cracks, imagine how many other watches could as well. Now, I'm not only saying it's just for Omega. There's Rolexes, there's APs, there's Pateks that could be fake, but there's also Seiko fakes and Bulova fakes and Tissot fakes. There's so many fakes out there, and it's just something where you as a consumer need to make sure that you don't get involved in. This big scandal allowed Omega to be able to recuperate their money back, but if something happens to you, there's no 100% that you could possibly get your money back. So that's why I always tell people, make sure you know 100% what you're bidding on and take the risks that you are willing to take. Just make sure when you do bid on these watches that you review the purchase agreement and you also read the description on these watches that you are bidding on. I will be using these services again, and I'm actually selling watches myself in order to make more room for my own collection. So the moment I do get a website up or the moment I start posting watches, I'll definitely let you guys know and have the link in the description down below. Subscribe and like below if you like content like this in the first place, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.